How many of you are applying for the jobs online only? Do you even know how difficult it is to get an interview if you solely depend on this way? Today, I'm going to introduce a guy who built a system to apply for the jobs online, as many as possible. Robert had built his career in NGO field, leading communication, operations, and public affairs. However, when he tried to get into tech world, he couldn't hear back from his dream companies because he didn't have any experience in tech. He knew that his resumes were filtered out by companies' application tracking system. So you know what he did? He built an automated system to pass the gatekeepers. In this episode, Robert and I are going to talk about Robert's journey and how he got into the new world with an unconventional strategy. If you are a senior level professional or want to grow as a leader in your field, you shouldn't miss out on this episode. Are you ready? Let's get started. Thank you so much, Robert, for joining us today. I'm super excited to have you here.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk to you.
Okay. I actually found your article on Fast Company a couple of years ago while researching for my online course about unconventional job search strategy. So I knew over 98% of Fortune 500 companies are using ATS, application tracking system, but I'm quite surprised that there was someone who built a system to compete with the robot. So could you tell us why you decide to do that and then how you build a system?
Yeah, I mean, well, first I would say that I think that the idea of an unconventional job search process is a little bit of a misnomer, right? It's unconventional in the sense that it's not the thing that most of us are trained to do. Mm-hmm. Most of us are trained to follow the normal path of like write a resume and a cover letter and submit it through the job portal. I was just like any other job seeker. Mm-hmm. I was applying to a lot of jobs and not getting the results that I had hoped for.
Right.
Generally, the number of jobs that I applied to continued to grow, but the number of jobs that I heard back from stayed about the same. Mm-hmm. So the project was really born out of me just trying to figure out how can I apply to more jobs in less time.
Right. So especially like senior position, it's really hard to find a good or suitable position for them online, right? Because like whomever you ask, like, oh, how did you get director level job? And then actually only very few of them say, oh, like I apply online. Like a lot of them say there was someone in this corporation like who can introduce me, or like my ex-coworker just helped me out. So I can hear you. Can you share a little bit about like how many jobs did you apply for, those companies, and then how many interviews did you get? Can you just like give us a little bit of a conversion rate?
Yeah. So, well, first I'll say you're absolutely right. Especially when you're looking at senior level positions, there are a few problems. First of all, most of them never even get advertised in the first place.
Right.
I've talked to some recruiters who said as many as 80% of those positions never get advertised, even on the company's own job site. Mm-hmm. So if you don't already know someone in that company, you're never going to get an opportunity for that job because you're never even going to know that that job exists. Mm-hmm. Second, I think that there are a lot of companies that are starting to use more and more tools that make it easier for someone to apply to a position if they know someone in the organization. So referrals.
Right.
And if you talk to especially big organizations, those referrals are becoming more and more relied upon as the main source of qualified applicants. Exactly. Now, on the one hand, organizations wouldn't do that if it wasn't delivering the kinds of candidates that they want. Right. But on the other hand, if I don't already know someone in your organization, then that means you're not going to be able to see me. I'm invisible to you. So I think that you're right that the ways and the pathways for jobs become even more narrow as you gain in seniority. Mm-hmm. But to answer your larger question about like how many jobs I applied to, the answer is a little tough because the bot that I built went through a number of different iterations. It started out as just something that I was doing on my own to like streamline my own process. Mm-hmm. And I didn't necessarily have metrics.
Okay.
Once I realized that this was something that was really beginning to tell a story, I thought, okay, now for two reasons, I need to start measuring this. One, I want to be able to explain to people what works and what doesn't work. And two, I need to know for myself whether or not tweaking my application process this way versus that way is leading to better results.
Right.
The best I can tell you is that I applied to well over 1,500 jobs.
Wow.
Out of that, like 1,500 laser targeted jobs that I personally would have manually applied for, I probably generated about 50 interviews. If you think about the number of jobs that I would have doing that manually, 5 would have been on the top end of what would have been possible if I was doing that manually.
So now, like, you learned that, you know, this way it's not going to work, right? It's like just like shooting out through an online system is not going to be the way you want to be, right? So after that, how did you change your strategy?
So it's interesting to think about my behavior after I learned that it doesn't work, because you would think that I would just stop applying to jobs online. The reality is, even when I knew that my chances were infinitesimally small,
right,
I still couldn't help but apply online because I wanted a job. I wanted to find a place where I could pitch in the kind of organization that I'd always dreamed of working in.
Right.
And when I talk to people about this, I liken it to playing the lottery. You know, some people refer to the lottery as a tax on people who are bad at math.
Right.
I'm actually pretty good at math.
Yeah.
And once in a while, the lottery gets up to such a level that I'm like, well, I can't afford not to play the lottery.
Well, if you don't play, you don't get it, right?
Yeah. Well, but even after I learned how tiny my chances are at winning the job lottery, I still found myself clicking, click here to apply now.
Right.
You just can't help yourself because the stakes are so high, and because what if, right? So even after I figured all that stuff out, I was still applying online. But what I complemented that with is a ton of networking and thinking specifically about who I could talk to and learn more about their job as an opportunity to start that conversation, start that dialogue, so that they become the person on the inside who, when a senior position opens up, they say, hey, I know a guy who would be perfect for this. And in fact, that's how I got my last 2 jobs, was strictly by starting conversations with people, and they remembered me when an opportunity came up.
Awesome. Like, actually, that's what I have been emphasizing to all my audience, but all my audience cannot agree with you more, because a lot of them are actually interested in building their career internationally, and but majority of them are so afraid of reaching out to somebody in different country. So what they do is they end up just applying for the jobs online, same as everybody else, knowing it's super inefficient, right? So I'm sure that you've learned a lot trying to get a new opportunity through your connections or talking to other people. But could you share some of your learnings from the past?
I would say that there are 3 things that you could prioritize if you're trying to do this. The first is just network, but be authentic. If you're out there looking for a job, try to connect with people who either have the job that you aspire to, or who are working at the company that you want to work at, and learn more about what it's like to be in that company or in that role.
Right.
And be authentic. Tell them, I really admire you, or I really love the company that you work for, and I just want to learn more about it because I do have a personal goal to end up in a place like that.
Right.
You'd be surprised at how many people are willing to take the time to tell you about how they got to where they were and the kind of work that they do. And once they know you, people love referring you over, especially if they're in a company that has a referral program.
Right.
So that's the first thing, is just network, but be honest with people and tell them exactly what you're looking for. The second thing I would suggest is find communities to plug into. Whether it's finding a hackathon that you can participate in online, or online communities where you can contribute, giving your experience. Basically, use any opportunity you can to demonstrate who you would be as an employee, and to demonstrate the kind of value that you would bring to that community.
Right.
because inevitably you'll find someone in that community who really appreciates it and who also needs that in their own organization. So that's the second thing I would suggest. And the third thing that I would suggest is find a passion project. Even if it's not something that seems like it's going to directly lead to employment, work on something that forces you to stretch your intellectual muscles, practice new skills, learn new tools. Usually those passion projects require you to be a part of some community so that you can learn from them, right? So it sort of supports that second, the second idea that I had. But the other thing is, at the end of that, when you actually have something to show for yourself, it is literally a representation of the kind of work that you do.
Exactly.
So the best example I can give you of this is I had this passion project to optimize my own job search. Now, it happened to be related to my job search, but if you really look at the underlying issues, I just had this really inefficient thing that I wanted to make more efficient. I wanted to optimize it, and I wanted to make it way better than any human being could do on their own. It turns out that's what I do for a living. And so when I finished that passion project and I wrote about it, people came out of the woodwork. They told me how important it was for them to see that kind of work. They told me how much that they empathized with, my position and how it made them feel like they weren't alone. But really importantly, employers came out of the woodwork and they said, it's really interesting what you did here. We want you to come and do something like that for us. And whether it was people who were offering me opportunities to come and work at their organizations, or there are dozens and dozens of companies who gave me the opportunity to come in and speak to their companies about my project as a way of helping them become better at what they do. And at the end of the day, that means I'm just standing in front of a whole bunch of potential referrers. And demonstrating something that I happen to be kind of good at that's an entertaining story for them. So it only further deepens that that opportunity of network and getting more contacts who can help you in that process.
Many people feel like, oh, like I can't change like my category, so it's not going to work for me, right? That those kind of jobs are for very special people, and then tend to give up easily like that, trying not to figure out like what's the other options, right? Have you ever felt these kind of like self-doubt or depression? If you so, like how did you overcome it?
Yeah, so if you've ever had the experience of getting really excited about a job that you've applied for and you start daydreaming about what it would look like, what it would be like to work there, and then you end up not getting that job, imagine that exact same feeling, but 1,000 or 2,000 or 3,000 times over. Nobody has ever not gotten as many jobs as I have. I might have the world record for that. So if you want to talk about disappointment and depression, it's definitely very disappointing, and it makes you question, like, if you don't get one job, you think, all right, maybe there's someone out there that just did a better job on the interview, or certainly there's someone out there who already had the same kind of a job but for a competitor, and so they're a much better candidate. But just the law of large numbers suggests that after a couple hundred, someone should want me, right? And I'll tell you the way that I broke myself out of it, and one thing that I think anyone who's listening can take stock in is I used that as an opportunity to prove that it wasn't about me, that it was about the process. And that process was broken, because if the process was broken, then I knew that there's still a chance. There's still some way that I can do something to make my way into my dream spot. I think I did a good enough job of proving that, so that now if you're out there in the job market and you're not getting those opportunities, just know it's not about you. It is a broken process. Now the question is, what are you going to do to find your way in, right? If you know that that's a broken process, it's up to you to figure out how it is that you're going to find your pathway in. One other thing that I'll throw out there that I think can be really hard to wrestle with for candidates is the idea, some of us, when we actually get the job we dream of, we realize that we suffer from imposter syndrome, and we're terrified that everyone's going to realize we don't know what the heck we're doing.
Exactly, yeah.
Well, some people have that feeling before they ever get the job in the first, convince themselves that they're not actually worthy of that job. Well, in the past 2 years, I've spoken with dozens of companies, primarily in the HR and recruiting tech space, And so these are people who've interviewed hundreds, if not thousands of people and hired so many people. And more often than not, when I talk to them about the key hires that they make, especially in leadership positions, I find out that those people, if they actually looked at the job description that they were hired for, in many cases, they're not qualified. They were hired, but they're not qualified for their own job. So if you think you're not qualified for a job, don't worry about it. Almost none of us are. Right? Those job descriptions are written in their own way to be aspirational. So don't limit yourself by looking at a job description and say, I don't have that one tiny little thing. So I'm not qualified. Instead, say, well, I got 9 out of the 10 things on there, and I'm really unique. I bring some other things to the table. So I still think it's worth me putting my hat in the ring. I'm going to talk to someone about this role.
Awesome. Like, it's really valuable. And a lot of people might be like super excited as much as I am right now. It's going to be my last question. So it's been already more than 2 years since your story was published on Fast Company. And you took 2 leadership roles after, and probably you've seen a lot of other unconventional like candidates as well. So if you can give advice to your younger self or other unconventional like candidates, what would that be?
If I went back and I gave myself advice, I might accidentally change history and not end up where I am. So I'd have to be very careful about that. But one thing that I will say, for people who've sat in my shoes, who felt like they were just getting radio silence, just break the cycle. If you find yourself doing the same thing over and over and over again, and you're getting the same results, it's pretty obvious that something needs to change. And there's only a handful of levers that you have to change. It happened to be that the thing that I was working on is something that had implications for the field of recruiting. And so maybe in a small way, I've actually helped to change that landscape a little bit, where employers recognize that they're sort of blind to certain types of unconventional candidates. But I'm not fooling myself. The reality is you just have to you just have to find a pathway to the people you want to be around. And I think that the rest kind of works itself out. I did this very public, you can almost think about this like a little bit of an academic internet prank, right? But I did this thing that was very public, and it brought out of the woodwork people who think like me. There were a lot of other unconventional candidates who came out who said, like, I've always dreamed about doing something like this. You proved it. Now I don't have to waste my time on that kind of a project. I can work on something else. But it also brought out the type of people who are looking for someone like me. In that 2 years, I was made the chief operating officer of a very successful startup. I'm also the head of operations in another fast-growing, very exciting startup. And I'm now advising a number of other entrepreneurs and startups. I'm on the board of a couple of organizations. So just making sure that the world kind of knows who you are. And it turns out people will actually seek you out. It's really hard to find an unconventional candidate if they haven't showcased themselves that way.
Awesome. It's really inspiring story for all of us, including myself. Thank you so much, Robert.
Thank you. And I wish everyone the best of luck in their searches, and I'm sure we'll cross paths again.
I hope that you enjoyed this session as much as I did. If you'd like to watch Robert's TED Talk or read his article on Fast Company, and please check out the links below in the description box. If you really like this episode, please give us a thumbs up and tell us how you're going to apply Robert's insights and learning to your own situations. When you leave a comment, if possible, please leave it in English so that Robert can read as well. Thank you so much again, and I'll talk to you next Thursday. Bye!